Hello everyone, so welcome. This is our intro to our air pollution lab, and the idea behind this lab is that we are going to be setting up some petri dishes. We're going to label them, we're going to add a little bit of Vaseline to the petri dishes, and then we're going to open them up and leave them in different places. And the idea here is that we're going to try to figure out how much in terms of air pollutants can we find in different places, what types are there, right? And then compare that to the class data and see if we have similar results or not. So in line with thinking about indoor versus outdoor air pollutants, different areas of our apartment or house, and things like that. So the first thing that we need to figure out before we actually set up our lab is our experimental design. So I'm going to leave it up to you all to figure out what exactly you want to test and what is the question that we are looking at here. So if you take a look, we've got an experimental design kind of graphic organizer, and hopefully this will help you figure out what your lesson and your experiment will be around this. You are going to be filling this out on your own, so make sure you have an answer for each of these parts. So the first thing here is, well, what's the problem? What are we trying to solve? This has to do with something about air pollution, right? So what exactly are we thinking about in this lab in terms of air pollution? The hypothesis is a testable statement, which includes your independent variable and your dependent variable and what you expect to occur. So typically, we'll write our hypothesis in this particular way. If blank, then blank will blank. So if I change the different areas in which I put my petri dishes, whether they're indoor or outdoors, then when we measure the amount of air pollutants in here, they will be different such that the outdoor air pollutant one will have more or will have less or something like that. So basically you're saying if we do this, then this will happen, right? So our independent variable is the part that we're changing. So in that quite not so great example there that I just gave, the part that you're changing is whether it's indoor versus outdoor, right? The dependent variable, the part that I'm measuring, is, well, how many particles of air pollutants can I find in my petri dish? Right. You also want to think about, when you're designing this experiment, what constants are you going to have? Right? What are the things that are going to stay the same during the experiment? Are you going to keep them out for the same amount of time? Are you going to set them out at the same time of day? Are you going to try to keep them relatively within the same temperature? Are you going to keep them at the same level? Are they going to be facing the same way, right? So what are the constants that you're going to have in this experiment? And what is your control group? What is the thing that you're going to compare it to versus what are your experimental groups? What are the things that you're changing, right? Finally, if we go back here, we need to figure out how are we going to collect our data and how are we going to analyze it. So in the next few videos after we set up, we'll talk a little bit more about how we collect our data, but the idea here is that we're going to take a little magnifying glass and some light, and we're going to try to see how many different particles we have. We're going to try to count them. Once we collect our data, we'll be able to compare indoor versus outdoor. And then, well, what do we do with that, right? Are we going to present our information in a graph? How are we going to draw conclusions? Do we have enough data? That sort of deal. So all of these things are really important to think about when you design this. You could consider testing indoor versus outdoor pollutants. You could consider testing different places in your home. You could consider testing the same place but in 3 different areas, right? Like the living room, but in 3 different areas. You could consider daytime versus nighttime. Lots of different things that you can decide to do for your experiment. So it is up to you to figure it out, and I am super excited to hear what you all come up with.